When I first saw the envelope pinned to my ranch gate, I thought it was just another flyer, maybe a lost pet or a community barbecue invite. But no, it was an official notice. A big, bold letterhead from the Whisper Ridge Homeowners Association, telling me I had 72 hours to vacate the area due to continued violation of HOA guidelines. Violation? Of my own land? I laughed, out loud, right there next to my fence post. Because this eviction notice may look like your typical HOA power play, but it's not what you think. See, the folks running that HOA didn't do their homework. They didn't realize that the piece of land they were trying to kick me off of isn't theirs at all. It's part of my ranch. Always has been. And the best part? Their little HOA office and private parking lot? Yeah, that sits squarely on land they lease from me. Land I hadn't increased rent on in over a decade, until now. So I doubled their rent and put a tractor right across their parking lot entrance. Let's just say, the next notice came from me. Some people inherit jewelry or antiques from their family. I inherited land, wide, open, stubborn land that stretches past the horizon and knows more about my family than any old photo album ever could. My ranch has been the family for 3 generations. My grandfather bought it after returning from the war, scraped together his savings, signed the deed, and carved out a life from the raw red clay and cedar brush of Texas soil. Back then, there wasn't a single paved road in sight, just dirt tracks, barbed wire, and the occasional passing neighbor who waved like he hadn't seen another soul in a week. He built the first house on the property with his own hands, a small clapboard cabin near the oak grove where the cattle still shade themselves to this day. My father added fencing, irrigation, and a barn. I added the workshop, upgraded the fencing, installed solar panels, and restored the old house. But the land? The land stayed the same. I didn't grow up with much, but I grew up with this. Every inch of that soil holds a memory, a callus, a scar, a lesson. So when I say it's mine, I don't just mean legally. I mean soul deep. Back in the early 2000s, I got a visit from a smooth-talking guy in a polo shirt and loafers. Said he was a developer. Said the county had approved a small suburban project along the edge of the county road, the far corner of my ranch, about 4 acres I didn't use much anymore. He wasn't pushy. Said they wanted to build a little office space there to manage the new community. Offered a lease agreement, long-term, solid money. I read the fine print. My lawyer read it twice. And to be honest, it wasn't a bad deal. The lease was clean. No transfer of ownership. No right-of-way. Just a rectangular parcel carved from my ranch's edge that I didn't mind parting with, as long as I kept the land and they kept their nose out of my fences. So I signed. They built a small office, parking lot, and community mailboxes. Over the next 5 years, the development grew. Houses cropped up in neat little rows, driveways filled with shiny sedans, and sidewalks appeared like stitched seams in the landscape. A neighborhood was born, complete with dog-walking routes, lawn service, and yes, an HOA. At first, I didn't think twice about it. The HOA had its meetings, sent out its newsletters, and worried about trash bins and fence paint. None of it had anything to do with me. The lease kept the boundary clear. My land remained untouched beyond the lease line. I still rode my horses, mended fences, raised cattle, and watched the sun rise over land my grandfather had once tilled with a borrowed plow. Occasionally, I'd see the new residents from a distance, jogging past the edge of my fence line or driving past in Teslas and SUVs. Most kept to themselves. A few waved. Once or twice someone would ask if they could walk their dog along the back trail near the trees. I usually said yes, if they asked. The HOA office, built on that leased land, remained quiet. Rent was paid on time. No issues. I barely thought about it. Years passed. I fixed fences, sold cattle, hosted family barbecues. Life went on, slow and honest. Then something shifted. It started subtle. A little more foot traffic near the property line. A few more gentle reminders from the HOA about keeping the fence presentable, as if weathered wood was an eyesore. I ignored it. The lease was still valid. My land, my rules. Then one spring, I noticed something odd. A crew had set up stakes near the fence, measuring something. When I asked what they were doing, they claimed they were surveying for a future easement path. On my side of the fence. I shut that down real quick. I reminded them that the HOA had zero claim to land beyond the lease parcel. One of the younger guys apologized. The other just shrugged and left. I let it go. Maybe it was a miscommunication. Maybe someone in the HOA got a little ambitious. Still, it made me start watching more closely. And the more I watched, the more I realized something was off. A few of the HOA newsletters, the kind that usually ended up in recycling bins, now started referring to extended community zones. One even mentioned additional compliance boundaries near the south field, which just so happened to be my south field. It was like watching someone slowly try to redraw the map with a crayon and hope no one noticed. I considered calling a meeting, but honestly, I figured they'd realize their mistake eventually. The lease hadn't changed. The boundaries hadn't moved. Everything was still black and white. Until I got the notice, pasted to my fence with official HOA letterhead and just enough legalese to sound serious. It read like a warning from a government agency, full of words like non-compliance, unauthorized occupancy, and subject to removal, all aimed at me. The cherry on top? The HOA was threatening to evict me from a section of my ranch that I had owned since before most of their houses had roofs. It was so absurd I laughed. For a minute. Then I realized they weren't just confused. They were emboldened. Somewhere along the line, someone, probably Karen, the new HOA president, had decided that their little stretch of lease land gave them control of everything around it. They had forgotten what the word lease means. They had mistaken proximity for power. And they were about to learn what happens when you try to push a rancher off his own land. It was a Thursday morning, mild weather, blue skies, and just enough chill in the air to make the soil firm under my boots. I was down near the eastern fence line of the ranch, the part that ran closest to the HOA's little subdivision. That area had always been quiet, just a few hundred feet of barbed wire, a couple of creaky fence posts, and one rusted gate that opened into what used to be nothing but mesquite and prairie. I'd come down to fix a stretch of fencing that had leaned too far during the last storm. No big job, just some wire tightening, maybe a replacement post or two. I had my gloves on, my hat pulled low, and my old work truck parked on a patch of dirt just outside the HOA's lease lot. As usual, I wasn't on their land. I was squarely on mine. And yet, within 15 minutes of hammering in the first brace, I heard the unmistakable sound of soft-souled entitlement approaching from behind. "Excuse me," a voice chirped, sharp and officious. "Can I help you?" I turned slowly and saw her, Karen. Name tag, clipboard and all. HOA president, community watchdog, and apparently part-time land surveyor in her own mind. She looked me up and down like I was trespassing on her lawn. "Not unless you brought extra fence staples," I said, wiping sweat from my brow. She didn't laugh. "I'm going to need you to identify yourself and explain why you're on HOA-managed property." I blinked, then gestured at the fence post. "Because it's my fence. My land." "That's not possible," she said curtly. "This area falls under Whisper Ridge's south boundary, and unauthorized personnel are prohibited from making modifications without board approval." I let that one hang in the air for a second. Then I straightened up and pulled the folded map out of my back pocket. The same county plot I'd carried ever since her survey crew had wandered too far the year before. "This line right here," I said, pointing to the bold mark, "is your boundary. This field, this post, this road, it's mine." Karen gave it a cursory glance, then waved a dismissive hand. "Well, boundaries have been adjusted since that was filed. You're working off outdated documents." I smiled slowly. "County assessor printed this last month." She frowned. "Regardless, your presence is causing confusion. You're not wearing identification. You're operating a non-permitted vehicle." "You mean the tractor?" She sniffed. "There are rules about motorized equipment near shared property lines." That was the moment I realized this wasn't about rules. It wasn't even about property. It was about control. Karen had spent too much time convincing herself that the HOA's little patch of land meant she ran the whole valley. And now, faced with someone who wouldn't nod or retreat, she didn't know what to do. "I'm going to file a report with the board," she warned, tapping something on her phone. "You'll be receiving formal notice within the next few days. Make sure it's addressed to the landowner," I said. "That's me." She turned and stormed off, clipboard pressed to her chest like a badge. I watched her go, then went back to work. 3 days later, the notice arrived. This time it wasn't taped to the fence. It came by certified mail, with Whisper Ridge, HOA's official letterhead, and enough bold fonts to make it feel like a court order. The envelope was stiff, impersonal, and delivered with a level of self-importance usually reserved for jury summons. Inside was a notice of violation and, more absurdly, a notice of eviction. They claimed I had violated community conduct codes and entered restricted areas without board approval. The eviction warning stated that if I didn't vacate the South Perimeter Zone within 10 days, they would involve county authorities to remove unauthorized structures and prevent further encroachment. I read it twice. Then I laughed. They were threatening to evict me from a fence line I'd built, maintained, and paid taxes on for over a decade. Land that had been in my family since before their development had broken ground. They were treating me like a squatter on property they didn't even own. The kicker? The signature at the bottom. Karen Wexley, President, Whisper Ridge, HOA. Along with her title, she'd included a little tagline in italics. Protecting the community's vision of peaceful living. Peaceful living, huh? The next morning, I drove down to the HOA office, a beige prefab building nestled into the edge of their community, with exactly 4 parking spots, 1 flagpole, and a tiny rock garden. It was, ironically, sitting directly on the land they leased for me. I pulled into the lot, parked my truck sideways so it took up 2 spots, and walked in. Karen was at the desk. Her expression soured immediately. "You're not supposed to be here." "I own this building," I said casually. "Thought I'd check on my investment." "This is HOA administrative property." "No," I corrected. "It's leased property. For me." She stood up, flustered, but before she could launch into a rebuttal, I pulled out a copy of the lease agreement, signed, dated, and still legally binding. "I think you forgot whose land you're renting. And just so we're clear, your little eviction stunt was filed against the landlord." She opened her mouth, but said nothing. "The lease doesn't grant you authority over my ranch," I continued. "And it certainly doesn't give you the right to file fraudulent notices or threaten legal action against someone for fixing their own fence." I let that sink in before continuing. "In fact," I said, "your lease is up for renewal next quarter, and I think it's time we discussed new terms." Her eyes narrowed. "You can't just change the rent." "Oh, but I can. Read the clause. Right here." I pointed to the section that allowed for rate reevaluation every 10 years, a clause they had conveniently ignored for the last 2 renewal cycles. She was silent. "I suggest you gather your board," I said, "because your rent's going up and your parking privileges are going down." With that, I turned and walked out, slow, steady, and without another word. Back at the ranch, I parked my tractor right across the narrow gravel road that leads into their office lot. Added 2 private ranch access only signs and a bright orange "no trespassing" stake for good measure. They had 10 years of underpaid rent to explain, and now they had to do it while walking to their office from the side street. I've always believed that land speaks loudest when you let the paperwork do the talking. Emotions come and go, but documents? They're permanent. So after Karen tried to kick me off my own ranch and forgot who really owned the dirt beneath her overpriced landscaping rocks, I decided it was time to stop playing nice and start working smart. I went home, cleared off the kitchen table, and pulled out my copy of the original lease agreement. My grandfather had always said, "Keep your records where you keep your rifle, close and clean." So I'd stored every legal document relating to the ranch in a weatherproof safe, filed, tagged, and sorted. The lease was still there. Yellowed, thick paper, notarized. Signed and sealed back in 2003. Almost 22 years ago, with my name on the landlord line and Whisper Ridge Community Development Incorporated listed as tenant. It spelled everything out. The HOA's office and parking lot sat on exactly 4.1 acres of my ranch land. They were allowed to use the space for administrative purposes only. Monthly rent was due in full, every quarter, and subject to rate adjustment every 10 years. The lease had never been renewed. Not formally, not by addendum. Just quietly continued. They've been paying the same low rate, based on early 2000s values, for over 2 decades. No increase, no negotiation, no respect. And here they were trying to evict me? The arrogance wasn't just insulting, it was expensive. That clause about rate adjustment every 10 years? It gave me full authority to recalculate based on local commercial land value, which, thanks to recent development and inflated property prices, had nearly tripled. And then came the kicker. Buried in Section 6 of a lease, there was a specific clause titled Mutual Cooperation and Non-Obstruction. It stated that the tenant, Whisper Ridge HOA, would not interfere with the operations or access rights of the landowner on adjacent or connected parcels. They had violated that clause the moment Karen filed that eviction notice. It was breach of contract, plain as day. But I wasn't about to run straight to court. First, I wanted everything airtight. I called up two people, my attorney, Davis, a ranch-savvy legal bulldog who'd handled property disputes for landowners statewide, and a licensed land assessor, Mackenzie, who'd worked with my family before. Mackenzie was the first to show up. She arrived with measuring tools, satellite overlays, zoning charts, and a tablet loaded with current valuation figures. She stepped out of her truck and said, "So, I hear you've got a bunch of HOA folks paying rent like it's still 2004. "Not for long," I replied. We walked the site together. She confirmed the parcel lines, took fresh GPS readings, and cross-referenced them with the original plat map. No ambiguity. The HOA was 100% parked on my land, literally and legally. Their building, their walkway, their mailboxes, even part of their security fence poked 3 feet past the leased boundary. She looked up from her notes. "You've got full justification to raise rent, enforce encroachment penalties, and demand back pay." "How much back pay?" I asked. She ran the numbers. "If you were charging based on current per-acre commercial value, let's say conservative estimate, you're owed just over $96,000 in underpaid rent, not including penalty interest." I nearly whistled. "And the fence?" "Depends on how mad you are," she smirked. "Technically, that's trespassing." I thanked her, wrote the check, and waited for Davis to finish compiling the lease violations into a formal notice. He didn't hold back. The letter he drafted was a 37-page packet that began with Notice of Breach of Contract, Rent Adjustment, and Notice to Cure, addressed to Whisper Ridge Homeowners Association. Attention, President Karen Wexley. It outlined everything: the outdated rent schedule and the clause allowing immediate recalculation, the failure to renew the lease within the agreed decade intervals, the false eviction notice filed against the property owner, the unauthorized expansion of fencing beyond the leased lot, the public harassment of the legal landowner by board members. And at the end, new rental amount, $6,500 per month, due in full at the start of the next quarter. Back pay requested, $96,000, payable within 90 days. Encroachment penalty, pending. Failure to comply will result in lease termination and physical reclamation of land. I printed it on thick bonded paper, had it notarized, and stapled it to the inside of a bright red envelope. Then I hand-delivered it. Karen wasn't in the office that day. Her car was gone, but her assistant, some 20-something intern who looked like he regretted everything, took the envelope from me with shaky hands and said, "Should I have her call you?" "No need," I said. "She'll get the message." By the time I got home, Davis had already BCC'd the email copy to every sitting HOA board member, the original developer's archive contact address, and, for good measure, the county records office. The next morning, I posted a copy on a locked gate leading into the parking lot, just beneath the "No Trespassing" sign. Residents started noticing. One guy even drove past, rolled down his window, and said, "So it's true? They're leasing from you." I smiled. Always have been. Word spread faster than wildfire in a drought. By the end of the week, the HOA office had cars circling it, board members whispering near the sidewalk, and Karen pacing the perimeter like a lion in a cage she didn't realize had been rented. They had no idea how deep they were in, and now they were trapped in the legal fence they tried to build around me. The real kicker? Davis had already begun drawing up a secondary notice, one that would make the next move final if they failed to pay. Because if they didn't come to the table fast, I wasn't just going to raise the rent. I was going to evict them. You'd think after receiving a 37-page notice with highlighted violations, back pay calculations, and a new rent schedule backed by legal precedent, the HOA would have called a meeting, drafted a check, and tried to salvage what little goodwill they had left. But no, they doubled down. I gave them 30 days to respond. 30 days to either accept the new rent terms, start negotiating like adults, or vacate the leased parcel entirely. Instead, I got silence. Not a call, not an email, not even a certified letter full of fake legalese. They ignored it. Karen, of course, acted like the whole thing was a bluff. Her new newsletter, which someone forwarded to me with a snort, included a paragraph titled Landlord Confusion Resolve, where she insisted the HOA had legal standing on all properties critical to community operations and accused outside parties, me, of attempting to mislead residents through misinformation. Misinformation? I had parcel records, aerial maps, contracts, assessor statements, and notarized signatures. They had a folding table, a printer, and a sense of entitlement. So I made my next move. First, I called Davis. They're ignoring us. He didn't even pause. Perfect. Time to enforce access restriction. You want them gone? Let's make it inconvenient. I grinned. Inconvenient I can do. That weekend, I hitched my tractor to a flatbed trailer and parked it sideways across the gravel access road leading into the HOA office lot. Then I lined the entry with 2 giant round hay bales, the ones I normally kept up by the barn, and stacked them too high like barricades. On top of that, I hung a big wooden sign painted in white block letters. Lease in default. Access suspended. Trespassing prohibited under TX Penal Code 30.05. For rental inquiries, contact landowner ****. It looked more like a construction site than a community admin office, and it worked like a charm. By Monday morning, HOA board members were circling the block like pigeons looking for breadcrumbs. Some parked on the street and had to walk through the empty lot to get to the door. Others sat in their cars, idling, staring at the barricade like it was a riddle they couldn't solve. Karen showed up mid-morning, predictably late and visibly rattled. She parked across 2 spaces on the curb, stormed past the hay bales, and yanked the sign aside to get to the door. She didn't know it, but the security cameras I'd installed, while within my right, caught every bit of it. Later that day, residents started noticing. People walking their dogs stopped to read the sign. A few snapped pictures. One couple even took a selfie in front of it like it was a landmark. The neighborhood group chat, which I didn't belong to, but had a backdoor view of thanks to a very amused resident named Brian, exploded. Wait, the HOA doesn't even own the land their office is on. So, he's their landlord? How you messed this up that bad? And the best one, honestly, I kinda respect him. That's some cowboy-level checkmate. It didn't take long for the narrative to flip. I went from that guy on the tractor to the landowner with receipts. More than a few residents emailed me, politely, some apologetically, asking for clarification. I responded the same way every time. Happy to share the lease agreement. It's public record. The HOA has been on a long-expired contract. I offered updated terms. They ignored them. I enforced my rights. Simple, clean, respectful. Because this wasn't revenge. It was enforcement. Karen finally cracked on day 5. She called Davis's office and left a breathless voicemail trying to claim that the new rent terms were unreasonable and that she wasn't aware of any contract issues. He forwarded me the voicemail. She blinked. What now? We press. So we sent a final notice, this time with a termination clause. It gave them 14 days to either pay up in full or vacate the premises. No extensions. No appeals. Meanwhile, residents started showing up at the office asking questions. One guy, Tom, I think, even knocked on my gate that weekend. Just wanted to say thanks, he said, holding a cup of gas station coffee. Most of us didn't know the HOA was even on leased land. Figured they owned the whole thing. I nodded. They figured wrong. He chuckled. And you parked a tractor across their entrance? It's registered, I said with a smile, and well within my rights. He shook his head, impressed. Honestly, good for you. Turns out, Karen's strong-arm tactics weren't as popular as she thought. More than a few board members had been uncomfortable with how she'd escalated things, especially after the fake eviction notice. Some of them started distancing themselves. One even resigned quietly, citing personal disagreements over leadership conduct. With pressure rising and public support shifting, Karen finally called a special HOA meeting. Not to discuss the rent, mind you, but to review landlord relations and property strategy. Translation: how do we keep pretending we have power when we're squatting? I didn't attend. I didn't need to. I had the deed. Instead, I dropped off a fresh copy of the original lease and the updated rent terms, this time posted on the HOA door like a foreclosure notice. And just for dramatic effect, I parked my backup tractor across the back access road, too. Double barricade, double message. By the end of that second week, the writing was on the wall. Karen's authority was paper thin. Residents were questioning everything. And I had made it crystal clear that no one, not a president, not a board, not an HOA with a dozen clipboards, could rewrite land ownership with newsletters and threats. They tried to evict me from my ranch. I blocked their parking lot and doubled their rent. And the best part? Every inch of it was legal. Karen didn't make it to day 14. 3 days before the final deadline, she submitted her resignation, not with a press release or a defiant speech, but with a short, stiff letter taped to the inside of the HOA office window. Effective immediately, I am stepping down from my role as president of the Whisper Ridge Homeowners Association. I believe this is in the best interest of the community moving forward. No epalayi, no ownership, just a quiet retreat, the HOA equivalent of a white flag. The board didn't even hold a meeting to replace her. They appointed a new interim president within 48 hours, a soft-spoken man named Leo, who worked in IT and had never once sent anyone a compliance warning. Leo was the opposite of Karen in every way, calm, courteous, and most importantly, aware of boundaries, both legal and personal. He called me 2 days after taking the role. "Mr. Wallace," he said, "first off, I just want to apologize, personally and on behalf of the board. We've reviewed the lease, and we know we messed up badly." I appreciated the honesty and the tone. It wasn't defensive, and it wasn't condescending. He asked if we could meet to discuss new terms. So we did. Over coffee at the town cafe, we negotiated a new lease, this time updated to reflect current land values, with clear language about limits, usage, and renewal. He even agreed to add a clause requiring any future board to get sign-off from the landowner, me, before sending out letters that even mentioned my ranch. And just like that, peace was back on the table. The tractors moved. The barricades came down. The new lease was signed, sealed, and filed with the county. No more eviction threats. No more entitlement. Just respect. The community, meanwhile, had undergone its own quiet shift. Karen wasn't just out of office. She was out. Her house sold quickly and quietly. And the new couple who moved and brought baked goods to their first HOA meeting and didn't even know what the word easement meant. Residents who once blindly followed every directive from the board now ask questions, healthy ones. They talk to each other instead of whispering behind fences. The neighborhood newsletter dropped the compliance column altogether and replaced it with gardening tips and local event updates. As for me, I went back to my fence line that weekend and finished the job I'd started, mending the last 2 posts by hand and stringing fresh wire across the final stretch of cedar. I added a new sign, too. Small, respectful, but clear. Private property, ranch land. Not subject to HOA jurisdiction. Entry by invitation only. It wasn't a challenge. It was a statement of fact. I didn't put it there to provoke anyone. I put it there so the next time someone came walking down the line with a clipboard and a smirk, they'd know exactly where they stood. I still get nods from the neighbors now and then. A few even stop to chat when they see me working the fence or riding the tractor. One man from the cul-de-sac brought his son over just to meet the guy who made the HOA blink. I don't need trophies. I don't need revenge. All I ever needed was for people to remember. Ownership matters. Not just in name, not just in theory, but in deed. And now, the ranch is quiet again. And so is the HOA. If someone thinks they can evict you from your own land, just smile and remind them that you own the deed and maybe even their parking lot too. Because here's the thing. People love to throw around authority, especially the kind written in bylaws and board minutes, stamped with fake urgency and handed out like it means something. But none of that matters if they don't own the dirt beneath their own feet. Karen thought that a title and a clipboard gave her control. She forgot about the lease. She forgot about boundaries. Most of all, she forgot that while HOAs can make rules, they can't rewrite the law. They thought I'd roll over. They thought I'd be intimidated. Instead, I did what any rancher would do. I read the fine print, stood my ground, and let the facts speak louder than her threats. You don't need to shout to win. You don't need revenge. All you need is the deed, the patience to let someone dig their own hole, and maybe a tractor to block the driveway when it's time to remind them who's really in charge. Because power fades. But land? Land remembers who owns it.